Thank you for having me. As you know, today is International Women's Day, a holiday that's celebrated around the world in many countries. The United Nations has this as their holiday. I wanted to tell you about some important upcoming dates. April 21st, there will be a huge march in New York City, actually, to ask for the end of nuclear testing. And I have petitions on a table. Please find them, take them, and sign them to end nuclear testing. This is going to be a round-the-world effort. Another peace effort, it will be March 21st. It's called World Without War, and that will meet in Washington, D.C. I've been talking to Paul George about what local things we will be having here in Palo Alto, and I'm not really sure, but I will be very happy to forward that information. WILPF, it's such a long name, we say WILPF. It will celebrate its 100th birthday in April 26th, and it was formed 100 years ago by Jane Addams and other Allied women meeting with the German women in The Hague to try to stop World War I. The organization has been going ever since. It is an international organization in 40 countries, and we do accept men as members, and we hope some of you will join. I'm very thrilled at our program today. We have three marvelous people who will be talking, and a wonderful dancer. Dr. Cherrill Spencer is a retired SLAC engineer who will discuss an international conference she attended to advance women working in physics. Unfortunately, we won't be able to watch Dr. Spencer's 13-minute video, but I'm sorry?
They watch it at home.
You can watch it at home. We also have, I guess I'll wait till the next person to introduce our next speaker. I wish we could have each person talk at least an hour and dance at least an hour. They are so wonderful and informative. So again, Dr. Spencer, would you be our first speaker? Well, yes, please, go ahead.
So we should set up. Yeah, we got all set up.
Sorry,
Oh, you have your own.
I thought I was going to be the entrance.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you would prefer.
Bring the computer over. Okay, I'm get it. So I retired from designing accelerator magnets at the SLAC National Lab last year. I've been working as a physicist for 42 years, and I work both in academic and commercial institutions. And now I have to work out how this one gets me to the next. Here we go. So, this is a photo of all the women who attended the conference I attended last August. So I asked you, who are these women and why do they look so happy? Well, they're all women physicists. They're from, there's about 200 of us. They're from 49 different countries. So what do these women do when they're back home? Here's just a few examples that I heard people give talks on at this conference. Our most famous speaker was Jill Tata, who is the head of SETI in Mountain View. So physicists may look for extraterrestrial intelligence, And there's a website there that you can visit to help them look for extraterrestrial intelligence. Others develop new insulating materials that work at extremely low temperatures. Some physicists search for new elementary particles, such as the Higgs boson, which I hope you read about in the paper, was discovered last year. Others, this is something I did, I designed very homogeneous magnetic fields for MRI machines. I'm sure many of you have had to lay down in an MRI to be scanned. So I helped to design magnets for such machines. Other physicists study regular stars, and they work out how they evolve into supernova, black holes, white dwarfs. And another example is they actually look at the magnetic fields of planets to discover the structure of those planets. So that's just very few examples. So how does the participation of US women in physics compare to other sciences? Why was it necessary to have a conference of women physicists from all over the world? Well, here on the screen you can see a timeline from 1980 to 210 of percentages of women getting doctorates in different fields. And you'll see down there at the bottom in green, physics. Okay, so it's it's a lot less than biology or chemistry, and it's slowly creeping up. And I got my PhD in 1972 in England, and you can imagine the percentage was way under, it was like under 3% then. So physics is much lower than other sciences. And if we look at physics alone and look at the three different types of degrees you can get, master's, bachelor's, or doctorate, and you'll see, again, it's creeping up, but the number of doctorates is, still only like 18%. But thinking of numbers, there actually were 1,250 bachelor degrees awarded to women in the US in 2010. So you may think we're very rare, but we're not that rare. There are actually thousands of women physicists in the world. And down at the bottom, there are some faculty numbers. And so, for example, there are 1,170 women are actually physics faculty members throughout the US, which is not a small number. You don't come across them very often. But only 8% of full physics professors are women. So let's see how we compare to the rest of the world, okay? Because this is an international conference we went to. This data is from 2000. It's very difficult to get this data out of countries. So a lot of effort went into making sure these numbers were right. So here, it's ordered by percent of bachelor degrees going to women, physics bachelor's degrees. So you'll see Turkey is at the top. 38% of the degrees of physics went to women in Turkey, which if you do a bit of math, you'll see that 865 women in Turkey get a physics degree every year. In Korea, there's 657 women. You'll see the US way down there where that big arrow is, and 21% of degrees and 13% in those days of PhDs. But if you do the calculation, you'll see that 160 women in the US earn a PhD in physics every year. You won't see many African countries on this chart, because back then they weren't collecting so many statistics. But since then we've heard, for example, I heard at this conference that Nigeria has a total of 100 women physicists. But that number is increasing. They're working on it. So why do we care that the percentage of women working in physics is well under 50%? And here are several reasons. And diversity is good for producing excellent results. This has been proved by studies. If we don't have women working in physics, they could be working. Women can succeed in physics, and we've got a loss of potential talent. As you know, the children being born today in the US mostly are non-white, and half of them are female. And so if we don't get more minorities and women into science, we're not going to have the domestic scientific workforce that we need to keep being successful on the global market. And fairness and justice is another reason. Women deserve the have the same opportunities as men in any career. All these arguments here could work for any career, not just physics. So that's why we'd like to have more women taking physics. So every 3 years there's an international conference held. This one that I went to was held in last August in Waterloo. And we bring together delegates from all over the world. You have to be a member of your country's delegation. You have to be chosen from applicants. And so we're trying to network with other women. We're trying to work out what we've done in the past to get more women and what they're doing. And to do that, we have plenary talks. We had workshops that you had to choose a topic. I was in the professional development and leadership workshop. We had posters, we had outreach activities, we had a musical evening. Many attendees went to visit Niagara Falls on our free afternoon. This was what I talked about. This is my specialty, is working with girls to get them interested in science and physics. And I've worked on this intervention, we call it, expanding your horizons for girls. Since 1978, I was on the board of the organization that did this for 30 years. Over 900,000 girls have actually been to an EYH conference since 1976. They are one-day conferences run locally. They happen at a local college. Here's some photographs. The idea is it's girls only, and they meet women role models who take them through experiments that apparently they don't get to do at school. And the girls then hear about what it is to be a woman scientist, and we've discovered through evaluations the girls are very happy to come. They learn a lot of things. Many of them leave wishing to be a scientist in the future. So here is a website that you can visit to find the closest EYH to you. San Bruno has one. Possibly it was yesterday. It's very popular. You'll see here a bunch of girls at a conference. Sometimes there are 800 girls, 500 girls who attend these conferences. So this type of activity has helped to increase the number of women going into science over the past 30 years. So what are other countries doing? Well, here's a very small sampling of what I heard about at the conference that I attended. So India has some women-only universities. They're also looking into why do so many women drop out after the PhD. Nigeria has a different problem. They have conferences for women physicists only because their husbands in northern Nigeria won't allow their physicist wives to attend mixed sex meetings. Okay, China is looking into its remote areas, and they are sending out women scientists and physicists to go talk to populations in far away from Beijing places, trying to improve how many women and boys come from those areas to study. Estonia, one of the science departments there had trouble because the artwork on the old building, science building, had pictures of nude women. So when a new building was built, the women who were part of that department made absolutely sure that that artwork disappeared and was not put on the building, the new building's wall. So this is the kind of thing we suffer from. We had an outreach, several outreach to the public activities. And one of them was a blog. On the white piece of paper that you've each got in front of you on your page, I have written typed out the URL for this blog. So we were asked to submit personal stories about what it was to be a physicist in wherever it was we were living. And you'll see there were 24 coming from places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nepal, Peru, Uganda, places that you maybe thought didn't ever do physics, but there are physicists out there. And I would recommend you go read these. They're very short stories. And you will see how these women have suffered to actually be able to do the science. So this is on this sheet here, just a few extracts from what some of these people talked about. Brian is going to post this talk on the web, so you can go read all this when you get home later. Here's some photographs from the event just to show you the wide range of women. There were Egyptian delegates. They have 63% of their high school students taking science, physics, actually much more than here. We had posters where we learned about other countries. We took a train ride. Here I am sitting with 2 Iranian physicists. And again, 60% of Iranian physicists, undergraduates, are women. And that's because there aren't many jobs for physicists, so the men all do engineering. Here we are at the banquet, and everybody got dressed up, and we had a nice time, and then we danced. You're going to see a lady dancing soon. I'd like to show you physicists can dance also. Here's pictures of us dancing. There was like 4 men there and mostly women, so we just danced along with the DJ. We did the conga, and everybody really got into it. And there was a video made for, we interviewed many of the women. I'm nearly done. We interviewed the women. They interviewed 24 of the women who were there to ask them about their lives. Again, we've made a 14-minute video. Here it is. The URL is here. You'll find that URL on that piece of paper. So when you get home, take that piece of paper and you can watch this video. It's very inspiring. You hear from women all over the world. And here is the US delegation welcoming you to the wonderful world of physics. Thank you. I will be here for lunch. I will answer your questions then.
Yes, people will have, speaker will have a table. You can go to the table and talk to our presenters. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Spencer. Wish we could have a lot more time. Aparna, would you like to come up and introduce yourself next? Thanks.
Did you want me to just go to the podium?
I'm sorry?
Did you want me to just go up to the podium? Okay, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Aparna. Okay, can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. My name is Aparna. So as you might have seen on your program sheets, I work with an organization in Palo Alto called Heart and Home Collaborative. Heart and Home Collaborative is a new nonprofit here. Our primary service right now is a women's shelter. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the journey of Heart and Home, how the organization got started, why we chose to focus on women, and some preliminary results that we got from the opening of our shelter last year. So throughout this talk, you'll probably see that a lot of what I'm talking about does relate to women specifically, but a lot of what I'm talking about, I think, relates to people generally, and I think I wanted to walk you through sort of Heart and Home Collaborative's unique values and philosophy when approaching the issue of homelessness. So to do that, I thought I'd start with a little bit about my personal journey of how I got involved in this issue. So I recently graduated from Stanford, actually. I'm originally from the Detroit area, so when I moved out here, I was very excited to finally be in a place where I could be a pedestrian and I could walk and bike everywhere. So I started my first year here. I think every single night I would take like 5-mile long walks all over Palo Alto, just because I was so excited about this. And you know, one thing I will say about Michigan is when you do walk and when you walk around your neighborhood, you're very friendly with everybody whom you meet. And I think it took me a little while to realize that sometimes that's not, so when you're walking down the street of University Avenue, you don't necessarily say hi to every single person whom you pass. But for the first year I did. And one night, I remember I was walking past CVS, and finally, somebody said hello back to me. And this was actually an older gentleman. He was homeless. He was a veteran. And he had some of the most incredible stories from his days at war. And I remember I didn't even realize the time passing. I must have stood there talking to him for 2 hours. We bonded over our love for science. I'm actually a mathematician, so we bonded over our love for science and math. He had kids. He was estranged from his kids, unfortunately, but he kept track of them, was so proud of them, was very excited that he might get to see his grandkids soon. So I think I was very moved by a lot of what he said. And this was really, you know, I'm from the Detroit area, but this was actually really my first real interaction with homelessness. And the reason I'm going to tell you the story is probably the most memorable moment of the night was, you know, it was about 11:30. I wanted to get home, so I stuck out my hand and for a handshake to say, very nice to meet you. I hope we meet each other again. And he took my hand and he held it and he didn't let it go for a long time. And I was a little confused. I wasn't sure what was happening. So, I just looked at him and he said, I'm so sorry. This is the first time in 7 years that somebody has ever given me their hand, voluntarily touched me. I think that's something that really stayed with me. It really, really stayed with me. So I ended up finding out that there was a student group at Stanford called Night Outreach. Night Outreach's mission is that compassion and conversation are just as important as food and shelter when dealing with people who are homeless. And the primary activity that Night Outreach undertakes is every Friday night they take walks down University Avenue and they just talk to people whom they meet who are unhoused. There's no agenda. It's very open-ended. We really practice the values of being non-judgmental, of being open, active listeners. And really the goal is to create a safe space where we encourage the people whom we're talking to share themselves and where we're sharing ourselves equally. It's really beautiful. So I joined the group. I went on a lot of these walks. And it was incredible the kinds of conversations that we had. And I think our open-minded attitude allowed us to really learn a lot. But the reason I'm sharing all of this, and the reason it's taken me so long to get to the actual nonprofit I work with now, is because it was through these walks that nonprofit actually got started. And so today I'm going to focus on the three key lessons that we learned from these walks and how we were able to implement these lessons and to operationalize them in our shelter and in our nonprofit more generally. So lesson number 1 was that a lot of people who were sleeping outside were there because they didn't have shelter options where they could sleep indoors. And I think this is probably something we all know at this point, but I think it was a lesson worth learning for us as students. Lesson number 2 was that a lot of the people whom we met on these walks had tons of experiences with services in the area. They had a lot of really good ideas because of that about how these services could be improved or how these services could be tailored to meet their own individual unique needs. Everybody had their own ideas. There was no really one-size-fits-all in terms of what was a good model for providing services to an individual. And I think lesson number 3 was the lesson that I started with in that first story, which is that social connectedness, creation of community, is a real challenge when you're dealing with the issue of homelessness and when you're working with individuals who are unhoused. On the streets, even in services, that sense of community is something that's often not cultivated. So I'm just going to step through each of these 3 lessons and talk a little bit about how that has informed our work at Heart and Home. So lesson number 1, lack of access to shelter. I'm going to start with a few statistics. So Santa Clara County has over 7,000 individuals who are unhoused. More than 2,000 of these individuals are women. So in Santa Clara County, 75% of the people who are homeless actually sleep outside unsheltered. This is huge. This actually puts us in the top 5 in the nation, the rate of people who are homeless who sleep unsheltered. So there really is not a lot of shelter in this area. And actually, there has been very little done to address this issue. In the recent years, we've seen several big shelters close. San Mateo a few years ago, which is a big women's shelter that took ladies from San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, closed. Recently, I'm sure you've all followed, the Armory, which was a cold weather shelter in Sunnyvale, also closed. Of course, I think it's great that there's been a push towards building more affordable housing units, but that has not kept pace with the number of shelter beds that have gone away. So the lack of access to shelter has really been a big issue in this area. Now, particularly with women, like I said, the closing of San Mateo actually led to a situation where there are fewer than 30 beds in women-specific shelters in the county. This is a huge problem because actually physical assault is probably the #1 problem that women who are homeless face on the streets. So the assault rate is over 90% for women who are sleeping outside. Johns Hopkins did a study where they found that the #1 most effective way to reduce physical assault rates and also re-assault by abusers from a domestic violence situation was to provide women with shelter. It was more effective than relocation. It was more effective than providing legal aid. So really creating a space where women can sleep indoors is a very powerful thing. Not to mention that when we went on these walks and we talked to women, a lot of them said that just being in co-ed shelters made them feel very unsafe. Even if they didn't have domestic violence in their background. It was their living situation. It was difficult to share that with people who are men. And based on interviews that we had with a lot of these women and interviews that we had with case managers, this was actually a major barrier for these women to access shelter in the first place. Many of them preferred to sleep outside than to go to a cold weather shelter that was co-ed. So I think that was the first thing. We realized that there was a lack of shelter in the area. It was a huge problem, and there was something that there was really something that needed to be done. So me and a bunch of my friends, we were all students at the time, decided that we wanted to see if we could start a shelter as women. Now, not to get into the whole story, we did a lot of research about whether this was actually possible. Harvard has had a student-run women's shelter for, I think, over 30 years now. So we decided that we wanted to move ahead with doing that. But then it came to, how do we actually want to do this? How do we want to run the shelter? What kinds of programs do we want to have? What kinds of policies do we want to have in place? And I think that's where lesson #2 comes in, about the fact that people who are unhoused really understand the services that they're using and understand what best meets their needs. And what best meets an individual's needs can vary pretty widely from individual to individual. So when we decided to start Heart and Home Collaborative, we thought long and hard about how to structure the various teams in our organization. The board of directors, for instance, after doing a lot of research, we decided that we wanted to have a participatory board. So currently, by policy, half of our board is people who are currently or were formerly unhoused. And we really feel that this has been a great way for us to integrate the experiences of those who are most directly affected by these services into the highest, most strategic level of the organization. And it's really, we found has been a wonderful way to ground the organization moving forward. But even above and beyond that, I think I'd love to chat with you guys actually about the board model. This is something that we're still really refining to try to make sure that all of our diverse board members, have the business management skills needed to run the organization. But I think, that's one side of it, but I think the other side of it was really when we wrote our shelter policies, we decided to be as flexible of people's different situations as possible. So for instance, many shelters will lock their doors at 10. We have a policy where we actually allow people to come in as late as they want. And the feedback that we got from a lot of our ladies about this is many people, first of all, would come in at 11 o'clock or later. The reason was, first of all, they could take jobs that were later at night, so many of them could increase their income because of this. Buses run really slow, so even if they got off work at 9, it would often, take them 2 hours to get down to the shelter where we were located. But the other big thing is access to computers and libraries. So libraries often close at 10, 10:30, and the fact that we allowed people to come in a little later at night meant that they could stay, they could keep job hunting, they could send out applications, they could do any research that they needed to do, and come back a lot later at night. But having actually accomplished what they needed to accomplish. So I very informally at the end of the program talked to the ladies about progress they were able to make on their goals. I think more than 95% of the ladies who stayed with us said that they were actually able to make significantly more progress than they had initially anticipated they would make, and significantly more progress than they had been able to make when they stayed at other services in the area. So I think that our focus on flexibility and on allowing people to sort of shape their own experience in the service is something that we'd very much like to continue doing. In future years, we did not have a case management component to the shelter, but what we did have instead was a very flexible resource provision model. And that's what I'm going to come to in my third piece. So remember, the third lesson that we learned was that individuals who are unhoused often don't have a sense or don't have a very strong community surrounding them, right? So this is, again, something that the research bears out very well. There has been quite an extensive study, actually, on the social networks of individuals who are unhoused. And what they find is the closest like, social ties that people have, I think unhoused individuals have about a third the number of really close ties compared to individuals who are not unhoused. In terms of the mid-range ties that people have, unhoused individuals, I think, again, have about 20% of these ties. So their social networks are actually very tiny compared to people who don't live unhoused. And what was interesting is in some of these studies, they actually found that there was a big gender disparity here. So people who were, people who were women who were unhoused, actually had even fewer individuals in their social networks compared to women who were not unhoused. So clearly this was an issue, and I think that when we went on these night outreach walks, that was a lot of the feedback that we were getting too, is that the fact that we were interacting with people, that we were providing that space for those social interactions was really meaningful because of that. Yes, Lois?
What do you want to do now, next year?
Okay. Yeah? Okay.
What do you want to do now?
Okay, so what do we want to do now was Lois's question. So as I mentioned earlier, we did actually open the shelter last year. We had about 18 ladies stay with us over the course of the season. Unfortunately, due to permitting issues, we were not able to reopen the shelter this year, but we do plan on reopening the shelter again next year. So our shelter is currently a seasonal shelter. It's open during the cold weather winter months. And the shelter is, we have up to 15 ladies staying with us a night. We're hosted in churches in the Palo Alto area, so we're actually currently working on recruiting host churches to stay with us. So that's definitely one major goal. Like I mentioned earlier, our participatory board model is something that we're working on cultivating, so I think further developing that is something that we're working very hard on for this year as well.
How can we get in touch with you?
So you can email me at, is there a place to write this up? So you can email me, Aparna, A-P-A-R-N-A, at hhcollab.org.
Our next wonderful person is Myrna Bravo of the SEIU. SEIU Local 521. And she will talk about organizing healthcare workers in San Mateo County to get a living wage. Let's welcome Myrna.
Wow, what a crowd. Good morning, everyone. My name is Myrna Bravo. Thank you very much for inviting me to this kind of group. I am the chapter chair of San Mateo County in-house support services. And I am also a home care worker. We represent the in-home support services providers in San Mateo County. I have been a caregiver since 1990. Home care workers are mainly women and women with color. Most of us are immigrants. The job that we do is valued or respected by our county or by our society. But our job is very meaningful one. We make a difference by helping those who cannot help themselves to stay in their home and live in our community instead of going to the institution. To do this job, you need to have a lot of loving heart, passion, and tender care. Otherwise, we will betray for those of whom we serve. Currently, I am taking good care of a 93-year-old lady. Every day, I help getting her up, as she is very fragile. I clean her so she feels comfortably dry. I ensure her that she takes her medicine and prepare food for her. I am just like a nurse to her and a housekeeper to keep her, who provides her comfort and lots of care. You can imagine how a housekeeper to her who takes care of senior or disabled person. Without a woman's loving heart, this 93-year-old lady will confined to a single room whose care is controlled by the schedule of an institution. Home care workers provide quality care for the senior and people with disability at their residence. Because of home care workers' job is not valued or respected by our county or by our society, and given the fact that our work is not protected under the Fair Labor Law. In the eyes of our society, we are viewed as companion and not as a worker. For this reason, we are not entitled to the same labor protection as other professions. Our President Obama changed the legislation to allow home care workers to receive overtime pay. In the light of a recent court ruling invalidating the Department of Labor's action to provide ISSS worker with overtime pay, Governor Brown's administration announced that it will not authorize overtime pay, which would gone into effect this year. We were also excluded in the pay of sick leave that just passed by California legislation last August. We have just concluded the negotiation with San Mateo County. What we asked was a livable wage, benefit, and respect that we should have. We struggle to survive in this county. When I started working as a home care worker back in 1990s, the wage is only $4.50 without any benefits. It took years for us to get benefits and wage increase. Today, our rate is $11.50 an hour. An annual income is less than $15,000 a year. An average service hours is around 100 hours a month. You can imagine it is very difficult for us women to survive in this county, to meet both ends. We all know how expensive living in the Bay Area. Nearly all the home care workers work more than one job to be able to survive in this county. In the last couple of months, we have a tough fight with the San Mateo County without much to show for. Our leaders in San Mateo County do not see the value and the contribution that home care workers provide to the aging population and people with disability in our communities. Myself alone and other home care workers were arrested to send a message to the leader in the county that we need a livable wage in order to be able to serve and live comfortably in this community. Yet, the county is only willing to increase the hour wages to $12.65, which bring our annual income around $16,000 a year. Wanted to let you know, the living wages in San Mateo County is at least $17.33 an hour. The San Mateo County is one of the richest county in the nation, #1. We have big companies just like Facebook, Apple, Google, in this community. They recently raised the bus driver wage for $25 an hour. Before, they had $17 an hour, a big increase. Surely, if the county cannot lead, they should follow the path of big companies. Taking care of its residents, especially the home care workers, mostly are women with color. We are not stopped here. After all, we are hardworking ladies, providing essential service that promote independence, dignity, and a better quality of life for the people we serve. We continue to push for a sick leave, overtime pay, and livable wages, not only for the home care workers, but for all the low-wage workers who live in the Bay Area. Thank you.